great pleasure to introduce our keynoter, Dr. Raven Baxter, also known as Dr. Raven, the Science Maven. She's garnered lots of acclaim, ranging from making last year's 40 Under 40 list in Fortune magazine, and links to things like this are on our Voices website. And she also earned the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Student Excellence in honor of her service in educating the public about COVID-19 with things like this. This year, she earned a doctorate in science education to go with her master's in cellular and molecular biology. Congratulations, Raven. And she maintains academia cred as Director of Diversity Initiatives in Biological Sciences at UC Irvine. Raven founded STEMbacy, a live web talk show connecting the public with STEM professionals, where she joyfully causes good trouble by disrupting stereotypes about scientists. And also she founded Black in Science Communication, a group that works to build relationships and outreach capacity in the science community. So I know that any Voices attendees that somehow are just now finding out about you will soon be raving about Raven and the new path she's paving. And recall, sorry, you inspired me. So remember, as she's talking, you can type in questions in the Q&A window. And of course, general comments or tech help can be in the chat. And so let's give a warm Voices welcome for this true Renaissance woman, the queen of science rap, Dr. Raven, the Science Maven.
Wow. Well, thank you, Larry, for that incredible introduction. I certainly feel welcome here, and I'm very happy to be here. This is a very exciting topic to talk about. Obviously, I love communicating science through music, and I'm really glad to hear that there is this special attention and focus on this practice. I think that it has a very promising future, especially now that social media is booming and music, different types of music is more accessible, becoming more accessible and noticed. I think that there are plenty of opportunities to blend music and science. So thank you for having me here. Today, I would like to share my journey in how I found my voice as a musician and scientist, and what that experience looked like for me, and also some of the things that I've learned along the way. And that includes probably one of the most important lessons I've learned is how important it is to arrive authentically into science spaces. And I do so in many different ways, including how I create music to communicate science. So without further delay, I'll get started. So as Larry mentioned, my name is Raven Baxter, and I am a molecular biologist and science educator, both by training. My bachelor's and master's degrees, and also my early part of my career was focused in molecular biology, specifically cancer research. And then I later forayed into STEM education, and that is what my doctorate is focused in. And people always ask me, when did you know that you wanted to be a scientist? Or when did you figure out that you had a passion for science? And I have always had this passion for science. I don't feel like I'm unique in that, but there are some of us who have science careers today who have always just been curious about the world around us and eager to do research, whether it was simple research when we were kids, just reading about stuff or asking questions, X, Y, and Z. I was one of those kids who would be very curious about the world. I was digging in things outside in the dirt. I was in the library reading books, trying to figure out, answers to my questions and curiosities. And that evolved slowly into a college science career. And I had a really interesting journey. I like to say I took the scenic route, right? I like to dabble in things, figure out what I liked. At one point before I got to college, I wanted to become an astronaut. And I actually went to space camp where I found out I was afraid of heights. And that a career in space probably wouldn't be the right avenue for me to explore necessarily, at least going into space. I also was a very silly student. I was at space camp and we were doing mock mission launches, space launches, and we were doing role playing and I was in mission control doing the countdown. And I decided, at 9 years old that at T minus 10, we're about to launch our Apollo 11 mission. I tell everybody that I saved 15%, 15% of my car insurance by switching to Geico. And my camp counselor was very upset with me at space camp. So we lost professionalism points for that mock mission, but I still had fun, right? And I never lost that air of joyfulness, air of play in my science discovery process, and how I associate with science is very much from a joyful perspective, from a playful perspective, and from a perspective where, I just want to be myself and learn, right? And eventually I went to college, majored in environmental policy and law. Obviously, that's not what I do now, but that's where I started. And I was at SUNY ESF, which is an environmental science and forestry school in New York. And I eventually found my way to biology and fell in love with genetics and the genetic code, and how incredible it was that every living thing has this code. It's a language that we all speak and we can learn about it. And I was fascinated with that. And that is the rabbit hole that led me to molecular biology and a career in the sciences ultimately. So I always felt like I was welcome in science, right? I did feel like all that you really needed to have a science career was a passion for science, a curiosity for life, and, et cetera, at least in biology. And I was just I was doing my thing, really. I wasn't concerned. I wasn't experiencing anything that I felt was a bad thing, right? And so that was fortunate for me. As a student, I had very positive experiences with science. However, it wasn't until I got to my professional career, when I had an actual position title, I was a scientist in corporate America, did I start experiencing some negative things in my scientific journey. And I would have never guessed, especially based on my experiences as a student, et cetera, I would have never guessed that I would have come across anything that would be harmful to me or disappointing in science, right? Because I loved it so much and it was just my life. But what I learned when I got to corporate was that there were certain people around, and I think we all know the kinds of people we're talking about, people who just haven't been exposed to other people who don't look like them, but also love science and also have science expertise. And these people would sometimes treat me differently or mistreat me, really, because they didn't have this exposure or understanding of diversity and how to cultivate safe spaces for people who aren't like them, right? Or in different ways, even though we're all very much the same in many ways. We're not all that different. But we do have these unique things that set us apart from one another that I think we should appreciate. And some people don't really know how to do that. And so, unfortunately, by the time I had started my corporate career, within the first couple of years of me in those research positions, I had experienced many microaggressions, many just very horrible things were happening to me. And quite literally, like actually, people were telling me that I didn't look like a scientist, that I didn't have a place in the career. I felt very alienated, which was a little weird for me because I'm very social, I'm very outgoing, very friendly. And it really did feel like no matter how hard I tried to be included in the science spaces, I was still being excluded, right? Due to things that were out of my control. So I noticed that, right? That was not lost on me. I was very impacted by that. And I said, wow, I can't believe that I'd worked so hard to get into this space, and then all of this work just to get to having a science career, and I'm treated like this. And then I thought about all of my classmates who graduated with me, all of the people who were going to be coming in junior to me into science careers, while I was in my master's degree program, I was also a substitute teacher in Buffalo Public Schools. And I was thinking about the students, all the students that I was helping to get to college so they could have a science career and they would ultimately have the science career and perhaps experience the same things that I was experiencing. I didn't want that to happen to them. So it really was a moment in my life where I decided I want to be a part of this change, right? I want to be a part of this culture shift that's necessary to create more safe spaces so that people like me can show up in science spaces authentically, right? And show up authentically, and there be a culture of acceptance. There be a culture that can sustain and retain diversity. Ultimately, I did leave the position that I was in as a research scientist, and I decided to go into education and ultimately pursued a degree in curriculum instruction and the science of learning with a concentration in science education. And my decision to do that was really all of the things that I spoke about, but also I was working at the time before I left the position. The lab that I was in was across from a homeless shelter. And there would be kids playing on the playground outside, and I'd be in my lab working, doing this amazing research. And I could look outside and see all these kids down there that I really wanted to share all this cool stuff with, but I couldn't because the nature of my work was confidential and there weren't really any outreach responsibilities built into my position. And I thought, you know, I've learned so much. I have all of this knowledge. I want to share it. And as I pursued my doctorate in science ed, I learned about science communication. And I didn't know what science communication was at the time. But once I learned about the field, I learned, oh my gosh, all of these people that I had been listening to are science communicators. Like, for example, Bill Nye, all of the people that you can think of said those are science communicators. I want to do that. And so I, at the same time that while I was doing this, I had a couple of like part-time positions. I was teaching at Erie Community College, and I was also lecturing at Buffalo State College. And I started doing science communication, sort of like I was posting lectures online and basically me just spilling out information in like an explainer video. And I did that a few times and I really didn't feel like I was doing enough justice to how cool science is, right? And so while I was teaching at these schools at the college level, I decided to shift my methods into more creative and interdisciplinary methods. And so I shifted from, you know, that traditional course structure where you have lessons, exams, lessons, exams. And I inserted some interdisciplinary assignments, so creative learning opportunities where students could take anything that I was teaching about and interpret it through a creative lens. And so the product of that was I had students who made board games talking about the digestive system. I remember one student, the one student who did this named their game Shoots and Poops. And it was a play on Chutes and Ladders, but it was about the digestive system. And we played the board game in class. We had a student do a spoken word poetry about the circulatory system. And we created a very, we dimmed the lights, right? We lit some candles and we made it a really inclusive space for the student to show their work. And she made her poem or read her poem. And I taught this class, by the way, was non-majors in biology, and they, the theater students that were in that section put on a play about the menstrual cycle, and that it was like a mini musical, and it was incredible. I wish I had recorded it. It was one of the best things I've ever seen, honestly, come out of a biology classroom. And so I learned a lot from that. And I saw how much the students really loved being able to have that creative license over their own work, and really the license over how they wanted to show their knowledge, their scientific knowledge, right? Because there's more than one way to demonstrate how you know something, and it's not always um, with a pen and paper, right? Sometimes it could be with a camera, sometimes it could be with your voice. So I let the students have that, and I decided to adopt that practice in my own habits of communicating science. Whereas at the time I transitioned from making explainer videos to making music, right? I've always been a musician. I've been making beats and instrumentals since high school, actually. And I have been rapping since high school. And one thing about music is that music has always been used as a means to communicate a message, right? We have great storytellers in music today, especially rap music. For example, I don't know, Kendrick Lamar is a great storyteller in rap music. Eminem tells stories in rap, right? There's tons of storytelling rappers. Tupac, right? Um, and that messaging, that ability to generate messages and share things, whether it's about your life or a certain topic, it doesn't stop at science, right? Because science is also something that can be talked about. There's also something to be communicated about science. And so I decided one day that I was going to combine the two. And I started writing science music. And one of the first things that I put out was a song. It's called Big Ol' Geeks. And I actually made a music video for it. But one of the very first things that I decided to put out was my statement on what it can look like to be your unapologetic self in STEM. And so Big Ol' Geeks, if it's probably still in my YouTube, but if you Google it, you can probably find it somewhere. Um, I I wanted the visuals and the songs to speak to my experience as a scientist, but I also wanted people to be curious about the lyrics and learn science from it. So I'm talking about my perspective as a scientist through scientific wordplay. But the images are very they are very they're not what you would expect to see in a science music video. It's very much unapologetically hip hop, rap. There's club scenes. We have like luxury vehicles. It's very contemporary to rap, but also scientifically thorough. So that was my statement. And the statement that I ultimately wanted to make was you can do both, right? You can have all of these dimensions to who you are, but still be a part of the science community. And there should be spaces for people to be able to do that and talk about science in their own way, however they would like to represent themselves, and really breaking this notion that you have to adopt a certain pattern of behaviors, or I'll just leave it at that, pattern of behaviors to exist in the science spaces. I released Big Ol' Geeks in 2019, and I began to grow a following. And I'm really glad that I started off with that music video, because the following that I developed then were other people who were in science, but also outside of science, who really wanted to see that representation. And they support that type of representation. Later on, I released Wipe It Down, which you all saw just before I came on, and that was released in 2020, a few months later. And that I made the day after we were called home in New York. I'm from New York, and the pandemic was hitting here. It was one of the first places to be hit. And so the governor Cuomo, he put us on lockdown immediately. And so we were all just pretty shocked. This obviously is something that's very new to all of us, and everyone was panicking. And I wanted to create something that would be informational and something that would be not funny necessarily, but just to show everyone this is the information, and you don't have to be afraid, right? But you do need to be informed. So why don't we just dance while we're getting information? And I created it for my family and friends. Actually, I released it privately on my private Facebook page. And then one of my friends said, you should release this to the public. I think everyone needs to know what's going on here. And this song is really catchy. And I said, really? You know, because I didn't think the song was that great. I was just being silly. We were stuck at home, and I just wanted to do something for other people. And so I put it on everywhere. I put it on my YouTube channel, my Twitter, Instagram, all of that, Facebook, and it just went viral. It went very viral. It was terrifying because probably a few hours after I put it up, or maybe the day after I put it up, I had people in my comments on the various sites where the video was saying, oh, I just saw your video on the news. We're in Honolulu, Hawaii, or we're in Michigan, we're in Nevada. I just saw your video on the news. And I said, oh my goodness. And then came the questions, right? We had a lot of people, I had a lot of people that were asking me questions about COVID-19. They said, you know, we want to know more information, really liked your video. A lot of people outside of the science spaces were learning about what was happening and how to best protect themselves as the pandemic was at the early stages of the pandemic, right? And this was actually kind of before the mask recommendations came. So that's why there's no note of wearing a mask in the video, because it was even before then. So that happened, and my following continued to grow. And later on during the year, I released another music video that went into detail about the immune system, called the Antibody Song. And that song, I talk about the adaptive immune system, and really it is to introduce people to the terminology involved in it so that they can be curious about it and do their own research. That video has went viral twice, once last year and then another time about a week ago. And one of the cool things that I've learned from producing that content was that people have used it as a teaching tool, actually, or an introductory tool to learning about the immune system. And I also learned that there are different ways to communicate messages through science, or through music rather, communicate scientific messages through music. And I think that sometimes you just want people to be curious about it. You don't necessarily have to go through everything about a particular subject, but if you can just get one person to say, what did she say in that song? Or I'm gonna go look that up, I'm really curious about that, it can make a huge difference. And it actually can help people be encouraged to do their own research, right? We hear a lot about things these days about people saying, I just want to do my own research about X, Y, and Z. Well, you can help them get started by giving them a few keywords, a few notes to think about as they're being curious. So I think that I overall am really excited about using music, but also using imagery around music and music videos to create a narrative around science that is inclusive and that is welcoming to conversations about science, but also welcoming to alternative representations of what scientists look like, so that people who are often missed by traditional mainstream science outreach initiatives can also be included, or have an opportunity to feel included. So I am happy to answer any questions about my journey in STEM. I'm happy to answer any questions about methods that I use to create science-based music. And yes, thank you for having me here. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Raven. So our first question comes from Greg. He says, do you see that the playfulness and joy that you spoke of as things that could or should be played up more in high school and in college science education?
I definitely, I see a place for playfulness and joy in different ways, right? I think that we do have to allow spaces for high schoolers, especially, to not be afraid to ask questions. I've taught high school science, and I noticed that having a space, even where students can ask you questions that aren't even related to your actual the class material, is important, right? Um, and so I think there's a lot that can be done there, and also being able to signal to high school students who are about to choose what college they want to go to, what majors they want to have, and making sure that we're not perpetuating this nonsense that you have to be a very serious person to be a scientist, or that you have to adopt all of these stereotypical behaviors just to be in there in the field, when we know that's not necessarily true. I think that there is definitely a place for play and joy in high school science, for sure.
And would you say that it's important to ultimately empower students to write their own songs?
I think that it would definitely be important. There is some work that is done by Christopher Emden, and he does something called Science Genius, I believe it's called. And he is an English teacher, I believe. I could be wrong, but he allows his students to write their own science rap music, and they have rap battles. And the Science Genius event is like an annual thing that they do where these students battle it out, but they're using science-based rap that they've written on their own. And I see someone posted a link. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's Chris Emden is a great person to follow. I'm sure you all have probably heard him already.
So you offered give us a glimpse at your songwriting process. So, I mean, does a rap song come that you encounter and you see the title and you say, oh, if I just change that one word, it could be about this topic? Or do you start with the learning objectives and then try to find something that fits with it?
Well, so I usually, it all comes from one idea. Um, it's kind of like a seed that gets planted. So maybe I have I have a thought, and that thought bridges out to other things, and it's a little hard to explain, but I don't necessarily always look to cover songs. Um, so it sometimes is a coincidence that I write something and it ends up being a parody or a cover. Usually it just starts out as my own original thought. And as far as learning objectives go, once I have one idea, so let's say I want to talk about the periodic table. Do you want what's the goal, right? Is the goal that the students need to learn every element in the periodic table? I don't think that should be a goal, because that's not realistic for what students actually need to learn at in K-12, right? What they have to learn are the trends in the periodic table. They need to learn about like valence electrons. They need to learn about electronegativity and things like that, right? So I try to take away one idea, what's important about the idea, what do students need to learn in their grade level, and just kind of take it away from there. And I try to just be funny. All of my content, I feel like, is funny, and lighthearted, and gets people up and dancing.
Great. We have a question that came in from Walter Smith. He says, I love the unapologetic theme. However, given what you said near the beginning about the difficulties you ran into, maybe it's easier for cis white male instructors to do things that are viewed by some as a bit goofy, such as using songs for science education. Have you run into any difficulties with administrators with your use of songs, asking you to teach in a more conventional way? And any advice for other instructors about how to make sure this important work is valued?
That's a really great point. And so the answer is kind of yes and no. So when I released Big Ol' Geeks, and if you watch that video, you'll see why it was a risk, but I felt like it was a necessary risk because we have been going so long in our science culture with this cultural norm that wasn't really inclusive of all people. And as the person who asked the question, very much was a norm that was around cishet white men, and that norm doesn't really fit everyone, right? And so Big Ol' Geeks is my statement to say, this is my norm, right? And this is how I want to celebrate science. And that's what this looks like for me. And I put that out there. And for the most part, I actually, when I released it, I was teaching at high school chemistry, Regents level chemistry in New York. And when I released it, admin actually loved the song. However, it was the only issue I had was another Black woman came up to me and she was like, I saw your music video and I don't think that you should be acting like this. I don't think that there's a place for this. And the place that she was coming from was she still felt as though Black women like us had to conform to these norms, right, that I spoke of before, and that if we didn't, we would be looked down upon, that nobody would accept us. And I'm saying, sure, there may still be people who think that way, but I know in my heart, everybody deserves the space to be themselves, right? So I was willing to take that risk. And eventually, we had a few more conversations and she came to an understanding of like, Raven is doing this because she's trying to shift the culture to more inclusive space, not just because she doesn't care, about how she presents. You have to challenge the norm to shift it, right? If we all continue to do the same things, when are things going to change? They won't, because we won't do anything different. But that's a really good question.
And as far as for making this change happen, do you think it's just up to a whole bunch of individuals wherever they are doing their individual part, or do you see that organizations such as Voices have a role they could play on a larger scale?
You know what? This is also a great question. And I ask this question myself, and we talk about this on my platform a bit, is like, how do you create a cultural shift? Is this something that we do together? Like, how can we all do this? Or is this something that's more individual? And I think that it's a two-part thing. I think everybody really individually should be looking within to say, what can I do on a daily basis to create more inclusive spaces in science? How can I use my voice to do that? Am I using my voice really? And how can I do a better job of using it? And then at the organizational level, I definitely think that having people in leadership who are supporting these ideals and values that you want to bring into science culture as a whole, but even just like in your organization, that's important. And then also amplifying examples that individuals are providing and how they're using their voice or their creativity to communicate science and shift science culture to a space that's more inclusive. So it's definitely a community effort, but it starts with us as individuals.
Thank you. We have a question that came in from Pat. She asks, how prepared do you feel that teachers are to implement songs in the classroom?
Prepared.
Or what advice would you have for them, perhaps, if they haven't done it before?
Yeah. I think that, so from my experience, students like freedom, but if you give them too much freedom, they get overwhelmed, right? So I think that it would be interesting to see if there are any like established official resources where teachers can get training in how to do this type of work, perhaps hip hop pedagogy or et cetera. But I think that if you give the students a particular set of guidelines for them to create the music, um, like, these are the learning objectives, and you have to write about this, and then just set them free, I think they do well. Even if you're not musically inclined, allowing the students to adopt whatever genre of music they want, whether it's opera or techno or rock, rap, it doesn't have to be rap music. Um, you can even collaborate with music teachers, right? And make it an interdisciplinary thing so that you're not just leaning on your own expertise to teach this. I think there's definitely room for collaboration between science and the arts in the school setting to make this happen in the classroom. And it can be really exciting.
I think we've covered all the questions that have come in. Any last question or any last words of advice and wisdom you have to give us?
Let's see, any last advice or wisdom? I really just want to say that this is an incredible conference. I'm really excited that we are creating these spaces to learn about how to use our voices in science and how to make it engaging for the public. And this is definitely a time on this planet where we really have to focus as much of our energy as possible on filling in these gaps and making sure that people have access to scientific information. And whether the information is in a song or in a dance or in a piece of artwork or a poem, right? It's still a meaningful way to deliver information, and it can be more accessible than telling someone to just go read an academic journal, right? Those aren't always free, or just assuming that everyone has access to these things. So the harder we work on this and making science more accessible, I really think our world is going to be a much better place. So thank you for this opportunity and holding this space for us.
Thank you. This has been a tremendous addition to our conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.